Margaret. So Tony and I got to know Krishauna because our son is a graduate of Guilford College. That's Jacob Madison. And we attended a presentation that Krishauna did. She made the presentation with Gwen Erickson, who's the librarian and archivist at Guilford. And the presentation was Slavery and Its Enduring Legacies from Quaker Abolition to Guilford's Integration. And from that and further discussions with Krishauna, we know that she believes that diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts are most effective when they occur intentionally. And when Tony and I heard Krishauna speak, we both looked at each other and said, oh, wow, she would be great for a Wednesday night fellowship presentation. And just a little bit of her bio information. She is a 2002 alumni of Salem College. After working at Salem for 13 years as a Spanish professor and later as the college's first director of diversity inclusion, she was honored when the Student Government Association at Salem dedicated the Bryant Hall Overpass and Garden in her honor. That was in 2019. She is now the Vice President of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at Guilford College, and she co-chairs the college Curry-Coffin Commission on Slavery, Race, and Recognition. She is a frequent speaker and diversity trainer. In fact, she's coming to us from Charlotte, where she just finished up with some presentation and consulting work at a charter school, I believe you said it was a middle school in Charlotte. So that's where she's coming to us from, is a charter middle school in Charlotte. And Krishauna, we're just delighted and so happy to have you with us, and we'll turn it over to you.
Well, thank you so much. I too am delighted to be with you. I remember you all well from that meeting that we did. You all may also know, I'm sure, Martha Hatley and from Old Salem. We've been doing quite a bit. I actually meet with Martha almost monthly because we're working on a conference that our institutions are going to co-sponsor. And just wanted to tell you about that. That conference is with the University Studying Slavery. And it's a consortium of colleges throughout the country who are wrestling with their institution's history with slavery. And so I have been learning a lot about, I've been learning a lot about the Moravian experience through my work with Martha. And as was just read, I'm also an alum of the college. And so it's been really nice to see. We're working for that conference. It's going to be in the spring of 2022, sometime in March. We're still nailing down the date for that. However, it will be with the International Civil Rights Museum, Salem College, Academy and College, Guilford College, Wake Forest University, and Old Salem Museum and Garden. So 5 institutions will come together, and we're all doing this work together, which has really been nice that we're not in isolation. So thank you for having me. I want to pay homage to Mary Audrey Apple. Mary, I don't know if you all know Mary. She works quite a bit in the Moravian archives. She works quite a bit in the Moravian archives, and I'm not a scholar on Moravian history. I have done quite a bit of scholarship on Quaker history. And so I reached out to Mary Audrey Apple, who's written quite a bit on this. And I would just encourage you all, if you haven't made her acquaintance, she's absolutely wonderful and a wealth of information. So a lot of what I'm sharing comes from Mrs. Apple. Okay. And today I just plan to make those connections between Moravians and also between Quakers. I am a person of faith. My husband is a pastor. I identify as Christian. And so it is a huge part of my life. It is also a very complicated part of my life to have to navigate the church's relationship in the enslavement of my ancestors. That is also a very complex relationship, being married to a pastor and faith being the center of our lives, but also we have to wrestle with this history as well. So I will present to you for a few minutes, and then I'll pause and see if you have any questions or points of engagement that we can make together. Okay, so let me share my screen. And thank you, Ms. Norris, for giving me that capability and all the behind the scenes work, and also to Carl and you all for all that you've done to bring this together. Okay. All right. So there's a book that I lean to quite a bit, and it's called Designing Transformational Multicultural Initiatives. Designing Transformational Multicultural Initiatives. And this book, it says, the first step is for college educators or churches, whatever the institution may be, is to consider the historical context and the mission of the institution, because this examination will offer greater insights about systems and institutional structures. So according to this resource, it says the first step when we're looking at how we can create transformational change, we actually have to look at our history. We have to look at our mission, and we have to examine that. And I also just want to say greetings to the leader of your ministry as well, to Jenny. Just want to thank you also for being here tonight and for having me. I think I failed to mention that earlier. And so, so I will start with my journey at Salem College. So I am a graduate and alum of Salem College. I graduated from Salem in 2002, so almost 20 years ago now, with a bachelor's degree in Spanish. And I then 2 years later, or about a year later, came back to Salem College to teach. And I taught there for 13 years. And I also, as was mentioned, worked on a lot of their diversity initiatives. This is my friend Michelle. We're actually at that patio dedication space in this photo. So Michelle worked at Salem College with me, and she now works with me at Guilford College. And so we both shared both of those experiences together. She was at Salem College for about 4 years, I believe. So in this image, this is Michelle, and she is kneeling down, and she's putting flowers on the grave of enslaved Africans that's right on the edge of your campus there, right behind the church, right on the edge of the campus. And you see Amy Rio Anderson. You may know her as the Salem College chaplain and also former President Sterrett. And students, this was a really pivotal moment for our college. And I'm going to show you just one more image, and then I'll stop sharing for a moment to discuss this with you. And then you see here in 2018, Salem College apologizes publicly for owning slaves, the first college to do so in 2018. So I'm going to stop sharing for just a moment and want to just bring some life to those circumstances. I was at Salem College when they happened. It was a very painful time for us. It started, and I know before that, the Moravian Church had also given an apology for slavery as well, years earlier, years before that. But I was at Salem College when that happened. It was a very painful time for us. We had a museum on campus in Single Sister's house that's still there. And on the wall of the museum, there was language that said, if I'm not mistaken, it said, Moravians never condoned slavery. That was the sentence that was on the wall. And so with that sentence, it gave a lot of people the impression that Moravians had no relationship with the institution of slavery. A lot of people took that, and it was very prominent on the wall in the museum. It's since been taken down, so that language is no longer there, but it was there. And students actually went to the archives and did research and unearthed a revisionist history, a history that they had not known, that had not been taught to them before, a very different story and narrative than what had been previously presented to them. From there, we had a lot of meetings. I invited people from Old Salem, such as Frank Vignone, who was doing this work, and many other people came to the college to try to sort all of this out. It was not easy. It was very difficult because many people felt that they had simply been lied to. They felt that they had been given a picture that wasn't the reality, or at least wasn't complete. And so slowly you started kind of tinkering away at that history where the language comes down in the museum. The president issues an apology. And then in the photo that I just showed to you all, we used to, and I don't know what they're doing now, but because I have been gone from Salem College for about 4 years now. But when I was there that last year, Amy Rio, the chaplain, said, because it was known that Christ, the husband of Susan Osterline, was an enslaver. And when that became known, many people did not want or had relationships with slavery. Many students really pushed back and did not want to honor that grave site anymore. And so what they did was they rerouted students to the enslaved graveyard. And what you see in that photo are students placing flowers on the graveyards of the enslaved. I will tell you, I have about a 20-year history with Salem College as an alum and someone who worked there for 13 years. And I never knew that there was an African-American graveyard in that area. I never knew that that was there. And so it wasn't a visible part of our history. It was never discussed. It was never talked about. As a student, as a faculty member, really the picture that you're seeing, that was the first time that many of us even knew that it was there. So I bring that to you to say that this is not easy work. There's a lot of, when we started doing this work with Quakers, one of the women who funded our work, we received a fellowship, which I'll tell you about. We received a fellowship to study the work at Guilford College, and in the name of Judy Harvey, who is the namesake for the fellowship that we received to do the research. And as a Quaker woman, Judy said, I want you all, myself and my colleague Gwen, to go to every Quaker meeting. We need to know this history. She said, at the same time, this is terribly difficult history for us. It's so hard. And so I tried to start out my talk with saying I'm a person of faith, but yet I have to deal with this legacy of slavery as well. So I will jump back in here and come right back to you. Okay. And so these are the images that I mentioned before. And so I also at Salem College, I started working to really bring some meaning to the legacy, not just slavery, but what is the legacy? And so I came across some research, actually, once again, done by a student who shared this with me. I came across some research on a Alma Littlejohn Hines. Now, my maiden name is Hines, but it's very ironic, but there's no relationship that we know of anyhow. And so Alma Littlejohn Hines is the first African-American graduate from Salem College. The first African-American graduate. I am photographed with her here. She works at Main Street School, which is on, Salem College is on Main Street. It's just blocks away. And she said, no one has come here to find me. No one. And so I'm with her in her classroom here. We had a wonderful conversation, and she graced us with her presence and came back to the college and actually gave a speech to the students and spoke to us about her time at Salem College and how that was for her. And so we have to also not only just look at our past, but what are the legacies of our past as well. And with this particular woman, when we became acquainted, she said to me, I'm right down the street and no one from Salem College really engages with me. I'm the first African-American graduate at that college and no one engages with me. And so we also have to think of repair in terms of considering our history and our legacy. For me, this was an act of repair to bring her and to give her the honor that she deserved. I would not be at Salem College were it not for her. And so part of the repair work has to be honorable as well. And so this is my colleague that I mentioned earlier, and that Carl and Tony mentioned. This is this is Gwen Gosney Erickson, and she is what we call a birthright Quaker. She was born into Quakerism, and we have just become partners. And so we do the work of universities studying slavery. Salem College is also a member of that organization, and we work together to unearth Guilford College's history and their legacy. And so Guilford was an abolitionist-rooted institution, but we also know that Quakers were also enslavers, and we have to present both of those. And Little John, she graduated in 1972. 1972. She came in 1969 and graduated in 1972. She was a classmate of Gwen. I'm sorry, names are Gwen is very prominent at Salem College, has done a lot of work there. Her last name has escaped me, but they were classmates. But she came in 69 and left and graduated in 72. She came with about 4 or 5 other African-American students. Due to their treatment at the college, all of them left the college without graduating. All of them left the institution. She was the only one who remained. And so her experience was not very positive, which we've written about and documented as well. So this is Gwen, and we worked together quite a bit doing the research at our institution. Gwen is a Quaker. She's also our college archivist. And so we get a lot of information, do a lot of information sharing and presenting this information together. And so at Guilford College, and I'm going to do a lot of alignment with Quakers and Moravians, and I'll constantly go back and forth between Quakers and Moravians because there's a lot of alignment that happens with these two groups in the area. And so at Guilford College, we have many public naming relics that happen at the college. And so we have a historical marker to Levi Coffin, and it says, "A Quaker abolitionist guided slaves on paths to freedom as a leader of the Underground Railroad." That is all true. That is all true. We have also naming to the founder of Quakerism. Our streets are called George Fox Road, for example. The Quaker founder, George Fox is the founder of Quakerism. The founder of our college is Nathan Hunt, and we have streets that are named to Nathan Hunt as well, as you can see. So we have quite a bit of public naming. As well as Levi Coffin, I mentioned the historical marker. We also have a road that's called Levi Coffin Drive. So we have quite a bit of public naming that's happened at the college to various Quakers, and some of them affiliated with abolitionism, some of them were not. And so I want to now bring in Adelaide Fries. And so she wrote quite a bit about the history of the Moravians. And so one such article is titled "Parallel Lines in Piedmont, North Carolina, Quaker and Moravian History, 1949. And so this is a very interesting article. I read this years ago, and it's always really stuck with me. And so within it, she makes many parallels between Quakers and Moravians. And so this one, let's see, okay. And so here, Moravians, we have the formerly named the Unity of Brethren. And so with Quakers, formerly known as the Religious Society of Friends. With Moravians, origins are in Pennsylvania, Germans, Carol's Manor, etc. And with Quakers, origins are also Pennsylvania Germans, Carol's Manor, Thomasville. With Quakers, we have German as the spoken language. And with, I'm sorry, I think I juxtaposed that and put that there together. So sorry about that. I see a mistake there. And then the language spoken German, and then with Quakers, of course, being English. With the arrival clusters came from Pennsylvania, men first, and then female brides, then children, according to Fries. And then with the Quakers, you have Pennsylvania, Virginia, but they came in families, And so with the land, previously selected land with specific professionals, so tanners, bakers, that sort of thing. However, with Quakers, they selected their land upon arrival. It wasn't previously selected before they came. The education, of course, we have Salem's Girls School, which is now Salem College. And with the Quakers, we have the New Garden Boarding School, which is now Guilford College, years apart. So 1772 as the founding of Salem College versus 1834 as the founding of Guilford College. So some of those parallels there. And so now I want to bring Fries back to the conversation, but also align that with Carter G. Woodson. So Carter G. Woodson is known as the father of Black History Month. And Carter G. Woodson is a historian like Fries. He's also a historian. And he really challenged a lot of her work and a lot of the work and a lot of the framing of her work. And so, and I must say, I can appreciate someone who is committed to history as Fries was, but some of her work is very difficult to read. As an African-American, that is. Some of it is quite difficult to read. For example, she writes, slavery should be credited with lifting a race of savages into civilization. These are the types of things that I'm talking about. It can be very difficult to read some of Fries's work, I must say. Although I would also say, I don't know, very few have contributed to Moravian history as Fries has, but it can be very difficult. And so Carter G. Woodson really calls her out on this. And he says, he writes, move my screen here so I can see this. Okay, he writes, sorry, Zoom just has so many little things that obstruct your view. Okay, there we go. So Carter G. Woodson wrote, the Quakers had the same difficulty as the Moravians. And so he's comparing Quakers and Moravians in this 1943 article in translating their profession into action. Although the Quakers he's talking about were decidedly the best friends of the Negro in the antebellum times, Quakers in certain parts reluctantly admitted Negroes as members. Now, we do, of course, see African-American members in the Moravian church, but you rarely see that in the Quaker church. Even though they were known to be actors in the abolitionist movement, they did not tend to allow African-Americans to live amongst them. And so he goes on to say, Quakers in certain parts reluctantly admitted Negroes as members, and today Quakers, as a rule, they hate Negroes just as others of their race do. So this is very interesting. And when I came across this article many years ago, it always stuck with me because I've always had this twin relationship with Quakers and Moravians. And when I read it, I thought hatred is such a strong word. And I wonder, why does he say that the Moravians and the Quakers really hated the Negroes? And so as I began to do a lot more research in terms of Moravians, there's a lot of entanglement with slavery. When I do research in terms of Quakers, there's a lot of entanglement with slavery as well. And so let's unpack a little bit more. And so here we have some scholars. And so in one such scholar writes in 1896, as Wachovia Moravians were acting on their need for supplemental labor, Southern Quakers were digging in their heels against the institution of slavery. As Wachovia Moravians were acting on their need for supplemental labor, meaning they needed a labor force and oftentimes rented out the enslaved or purchased the enslaved for that purpose, while Quakers were digging their heels against the institution of slavery. Not all Quakers, that is, not all, but some. And then Cruz writes in 2002, the acceptance of slavery and the adopting of more American ideas about African Americans is the low point in the story of the Moravians in the South. As voices elsewhere were raised against this shameful institution, the Southern Moravians' acceptance of it was rendered even more morally indefensible. And so this was an article written by Cruz and Starbuck on Moravians and slavery. And so although they use different language than Carter G. Woodson used, the tone is very similar. They're saying very similar things. Many of them white scholars. Carter G. Woodson, of course, African-American. They're saying very similar, giving similar information to that of Carter G. Woodson. And so now I want to bring you to a bit more research that comes from the Moravian archives. I've given you quite a bit from the Quaker archives. This is from the Moravian archives. And this is a list of enslaved people by the administration. And what that means when we say they were enslaved by the Moravian administration, we're referring to administrators, tanners, tavern keepers, and others who were engaged in community businesses. It's typically what we mean when we say they were enslaved by the administration. And you can see the list of those that have been verified as having been enslaved by Moravian business people. Salem Tavern, the Schober House, many of these places still stand. Rudolph Christ, for example. Many of these places still stand on the campus. And the tavern, you can see the different areas, and Bethabara as well. The Osterline name appears quite a bit. And so you can see much of this information from the Moravian archives. And so along with those enslaved by the administration, there are also those who were enslaved by individual Moravians. And sometimes I've been in meetings where people, Moravians in particular, have stood very resolutely to say individual Moravians did not own slaves. We have not found that to be true. The administration did own them, but also individuals did too. And sometimes there will be a distancing from Moravians to say, just like Quakers, there will be a distancing to say we were abolitionists, but there were also Quaker enslavers. And so now let's look at the individual ownerships. And so these are those who have been verified as being owned individually by individual Moravians and not necessarily the administration, but those who we have been able to verify as being enslaved by individual Moravians. And this again is from the Quaker archives and also, Register of Deeds, but this information is, Moravian archives. So this information is coming from the Moravians' own hand, if you will. And so it's always interesting when there's pushback on this information when these are Moravian documents. And so I have bold-faced most of the names of the enslaved Africans. And I would like for you to just center on one of those names. And then I would like for us to have a collective moment where we say those names. Part of our work at Guilford College is we have a Say the Name campaign where we're trying to say those names. And so if you would just center on one of those enslaved people, I'll count to 3. And if you would just say their name out loud. 1, 2, 3. Peter Yarrow. Thank you. They heard you. They heard you. I think it is important that these names, and this is why I want to just honor the work of Mary Audrey Apple, who gave me this list, works in the Moravian archives and gave me this list. And I just want to honor this because oftentimes these individuals become very much unnamed. If you go to that African-American graveyard that's right at the edge of the campus there, right behind Home Moravian, not too far from it, there will be many, many unmarked graves of those African Americans. And not only are they unmarked, but there are no grave plaques there at all of many of those individuals. And so many have remained unnamed. And so even the fact of naming them can be an act of repair, an act of conscience, an act of love, to just name them. Who were they? So here we go. And so here we have, and I'm including some of these original documents as well. You wouldn't be able to read them, but just so that you'll see that these are from the Moravian archives once again, for the most part. Most of these are from the Moravian archives, some from UNC. But here we have an enslaved person named Jacob. And Jacob is an enslaved man. As far as I know, we do not have the last name of Jacob. But he is an enslaved man who changes hands quite a bit between Quakers and Moravians. And so here we have a notation in the ledger. And it says here, 20th of June, 1791, Abijah Elmore, a Quaker from Surrey County, to Thomas Johnson, a Quaker, paid 20 pounds. So paid 20 pounds to purchase Jacob, a Negro who was about 20 years old, who has been hired out for some years to Samuel Stokes, a Moravian. And so we see this entanglement with Quakers and Moravians in concert. And Jacob will go back and forth quite a bit between Moravians and Quakers. At the bottom here, it says, rented Jacob to the Wachovia administration for several years before selling him to Thomas Johnson. And so Jacob is a figure that's very central to this work. Jacob's manumission. And so here we have another first person primary source document that's from the Moravian archives. And this document gives us more information about Jacob. And so it says Thomas Johnson, a Quaker, sold Jacob to Ashley Johnson, also a Quaker, in 1793, with Abijah Elmore Quaker as a witness. So these sales had to have witnesses. And you will see that oftentimes those witnesses were Moravians. And so the witness for this purchase, one of them was a tinsmith, a Moravian tinsmith, Schober. And of course, we have Schober House right on the Salem College campus. That's a very prominent name within Moravian spaces. And so we have in the same bill of sale, Ashley Johnson states that Jacob had paid his full value of 100 pounds. And so he paid for his own manumission. Jacob worked and was able to, being rented out and sold out, was able to earn some money to pay for his own manumission. He paid for his own liberation, which is quite powerful. But we have something very interesting here. It says in this letter from Ashley Johnson, the Quaker, who ends up as one of the last owners of Jacob, he says that as soon as it can be conveniently done, I will apply to any authority. Just check my time here. Okay. I will apply to any authority that now is or may hereafter be established, where my Negro may be liberated in order to effect his absolute freedom. And in case of death, and in case death should prevent me from doing it myself, I hereby enjoin my heirs not to claim any property in said Negro, but instead to apply for a lawful freedom and not rest till effected. This is a very powerful letter where you have an enslaver who has said he has paid his due. I want him to be free. But there's some fear that his descendants may not free him. And so he has put it in writing that they are to free him. And if his death precedes Jacob's, he is putting it in writing, that his wishes, making them known that he wants Jacob to be free. And so you can see that, again, the Moravian was a witness to this sale, to this bill of sale, Schober, that is. And so this fear that heirs would not manumit or free. We have Addison Coffin, Addison. Addison Coffin is a Quaker who was the cousin of Levi Coffin, who I showed you earlier that we have named after at Guilford College. And he wrote, it was published in 1952, but he wrote this quite a bit earlier. But it says when it was published posthumously. When friends freed their slaves in 1774, many others promised their slaves freedom when they died, but heirs refused to let them go. And so you can see, because of this, oftentimes, even when, like Ashley, what we just saw, would manumit their enslaved property, oftentimes the heirs would lay claim to them and it wouldn't actually happen. And so as I get to the closing here, I want to bring up an African-American woman, and she doesn't link to Quakers, to the Moravians, but she's certainly a key figure in the history of abolition within Quaker spaces. And so Lavina Curry, sometimes called Vina or Bina, she's the first African-American known to have worked at Guilford College, the earliest record. There may have been others who worked before her, but this is a primary source from our ledger books at Guilford College. She is the first African-American, or the earliest that is known to have worked there and been employed. She was a laundress or a washerwoman at what was then New Garden Boarding School and later became Guilford College. And so here we have her entry in the ledger book, And we have how much money she was paid or how much she was owed, and more information about her here. What is more primary about Lavina Curry or Vina Curry is that she was an operative on the Underground Railroad. This name, before Gwen and I started doing research, this name was not known to hardly anyone at Salem College. I'm sorry, at Guilford College. I apologize to two institutions. At Guilford College, many did not know her name. We have brought this legacy out. Others, Max Carter, and there are certainly others who brought this information out before us, before we did. I want to give proper credit, but our work has certainly brought it more prominently. And a lot of that is the work that we're doing with other institutions. So we have a consortium of sorts that's bringing this information out. And so what would happen is Vina Curry, her husband was Archibald Curry, who was a free man, a free African-American man. And Archibald Curry died. When he died, his freedmen's papers remained in the care of his widow, Vina Curry. And so what Vina would do, she would allow freedom seekers who bore her husband's likeness, because the papers had a description on them. She would allow freedom seekers, enslaved Africans, if they bore his likeness and could pass under the description that was on the paper, she would allow them to fraudulently use his freedmen's papers to take their freedom. They would use these papers, and they would be heralded north by mainly Quakers, but also free African Americans. I shouldn't say mainly Quakers, by Quakers, but also free African Americans in concert, would help these individuals to get north. And for all intents and purposes, that was Indiana, where Levi Coffin was, who had left the New Garden, or the Greensboro area, now Greensboro, then New Garden, had left that area to go to Indiana. And so Vina Curry would send these papers from Guilford, what is now Guilford College, then New Garden Boarding School. She would work there and would send these papers, and then those papers and the freedom seeker would reach Indiana, give those papers to Levi Coffin. He would mail those papers back to Vina Curry, and she would do it all over again. We have 16 references known of how many times that she did that. So Addison Coffin wrote that it was known that she did that 15 to 16 times. This was punishable. It could have been punishable by death. We had so many different statutes on forging freedmen's papers and helping enslaved people. There were death statutes. There were 39 lashes on the bare back from the North Carolina legislature. This was very risky. And she did this. Notice I showed you all of the public naming that exists at Guilford College, but none to Vina Curry. We're trying to change that. And so in the spring of 2022, we will have naming spaces in honor of Vina Curry. When we have that conference that I mentioned earlier, in conjunction with Old Salem and so many other institutions, we will have a public naming ceremony to Vina Curry for the work that she did. And so coming back to Moravians, there is a note in the Quaker archives about Moravians that I found very interesting. And I apologize that I do not have the year. I believe that this was the 1820s, if I'm not mistaken, but I can get that information and send it back to you. But this is in our Quaker archives at Guilford College. And so there's a notation on page 67 of the New Garden meeting minutes. And it says, it was also decided to send an address to the Baptists, the Methodists, the Presbyterians, and the Moravians, inviting them to join the manumission movement or the abolitionist movement. So I became very interested when I saw this. I thought, what is their response? And then it says one page later, the Moravians at Salem were friendly to the work and thought they might be able to give a definite answer at a future time. I will tell you, my friends, I have scoured the Quaker archives looking for that definite answer at a future time. I have not found it. I have found no record that Moravians ever responded, that Moravians ever joined in the manumission work of Quakers. This does not mean that they did not, because I'm still looking for that information. But I have scoured our archives trying to find, because this is the last notation that I'm able to find, that they sent a message, and I believe this was in the 1820s, if memory serves, asking Moravians, would they join with this abolitionist movement? And it says that they responded nicely. However, I cannot find any cooperation between Moravians and Quakers for the purpose of abolition and manumission. I have worked with Mary Audrey Apple to fill in gaps that I do not have. At this point, she too is not able to fill in that gap. I've worked with the Quaker archivist, Gwen Erickson. Neither is she able to fill in that gap. And so this kind of just hangs there, that the communication happened, but we don't know what became of it. We don't have records that anything actually became of it. We do have records that others, like the Baptists, the Methodist, we do have records that other religious affiliated groups did join in with this work. We don't have that for Moravians. And so I'll leave you, because Quakers oftentimes will work in queries. And these are poignant questions that they ask us to reflect on and to consider. And so my question for you all today, what movement will you join today? As you see, the Quakers are asking the Moravians to join this manumission movement. One of my queries for you all is, what movement will you join today? I don't mean that formally. It doesn't have to be a formal movement. But what is the work that needs to be done that Moravian siblings can offer their voice to, can offer their time to, can offer their hearts to? And I was very humbled when I saw some of the information on some of these meetings that you all have been having about equity. They are powerful, powerful work. So that's what I'm talking about. That's joining in that information, that knowledge seeking, that information gathering. You all have been doing some very powerful work there. My next query is, what answer will you give? Because on page 68, it says that a definite answer will come at a future time. I don't find a record that definite answer ever came. And so today, what answers are we willing to get? How are we responding to all of the events that are happening around us? What is our response? And so I want to recapitulate some of the things that I've said earlier, which is history. We have to look at the history of our institutions. It can be painful, it can be difficult for all of us, but we have to look at that history. We have to educate ourselves on what that history means by engaging, just like what we're doing today. I'm engaging with white scholars. I'm engaging with African American scholars. I'm now doing some work on Native American and indigenous work. And so we have to do this work in community. No one person has all of the answers. We have to do this in community. And then what does repair look like? For me, I didn't want to leave Salem College until there was some repair work that had happened. And part of that work for me was looking at the legacy of our institution and knowing that certain voices had been omitted from that legacy. If you all were to go to the new student center at Salem College, there is a beautiful portrait of Alma Littlejohn Hines. There's a beautiful portrait of her in the student center of Salem College. And this was from bringing her to campus, students getting to meet her. The class of 2017 donated their senior class gift to her to make her portrait. And so just such a beautiful space. So if you're ever walking, it's right next door to you all, walk to that student center and look at that portrait and know what it means. So repair work has to be done. And I think there's no greater way to do repair work than to respect the work that is already on the ground. And so look at where this work is already happening. For example, the Hidden Town Project, which I'm sure you're already aware of. And also Mary Audrey Apple is doing amazing research on these topics right now. And so respecting the work that is on the ground, what are people already doing that we can respect and attach ourselves to? And then authenticity. What are those relationships that are authentic? And so when I think of the work that I'm doing right now with Martha Hatley and with others, these are authentic relationships. And we happen to have in common that we're all very invested in our institution's history. But we also are getting to know each other as people, as individuals. And so when we think of the work of what happens next, what can we do? We want it to be as authentic as possible. No one wants to be someone's project or someone's token. But as authentic as those relationships can be, who do you already know? What are those relationships like? Who can you join with where there's some relationship already having been built? Those can be powerful foundations for repair work and for what comes next. And so I'll leave you with my last quote, and then we will have about 15 minutes to engage. And so this quote is from John Lewis, who I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with. And so John Lewis says, ours is not the struggle of one day, 1 week, or 1 year. Ours is not the struggle of one judicial appointment or presidential term. Ours is the struggle of a lifetime, or maybe even many lifetimes. And each one of us in every generation or every church must do our part. And so I close with this quote to say, this is not work that happens overnight. This is not work that you can do once and then it's over. It really may be something that your descendants will continue. The work that you all are starting by having these powerful meetings on Wednesday nights. This may be work that you start and your children will continue this work. This is work that Levi Coffin started, Freeze started, Carter G Woodson started, Alma Littlejohn Hines started, Lavina Curry, Peter Oliver in the Moravian tradition, Peter Oliver, and so many others. And we're just vessels trying to carry those messages forward. So this is work that will go on. It is perpetual work. Thank you.
May I ask Ms. Hines-Gaither a question?